Okay, so today we're talking about Marxism in the Bressler, and I'm going to walk through the Bressler, pointing out what I think are the most important sections, and I get to use my chalkboard today. First of all, you should definitely watch the other two videos on Marxism. I would show them to you in class, except they take up a lot of time, and now there's weird audio issues also, so make sure you watch those before class so we can talk about them. I'm going to start with the historical development in Bressler and point out that, first of all, you will be relieved to hear that Marxism is about real objects and real things that might be in the world, which is kind of refreshing. And these things are divided into what Marx and Engels originally called the base and the superstructure. The base is everything to do with material reality and labor. The superstructure is to do with ideologies. I'm going to bring out my chalkboard. Okay. Here, look at this. Material reality we're defining as actual stuff, like the labor that you do, the stuff that you have, the wealth that you have, and ideologies we're defining as worldviews or systems that encourage certain worldviews. So ideology starts from the word idea, and ology means science or study of, and ideologies are ideas that we have about the world. According to Marx, is this in the right place? According to Marxism, the base and the superstructure have this particular relationship where the base is where all of the labor occurs and all of the wealth is generated. And it creates this superstructure that explains wealth inequality. So some of the items in the superstructure, I can't remember, are education, politics, religion, art. There's dozens more that we could think of. And the direction, according to what is now called vulgar Marxism, which just means Marxism before it got sort of taken over by others, is that it's the base that determines the ideologies that we need to believe in order to justify what's going on in the base. Okay, what's going on in the base, well, let me talk about this just a little bit more. Excuse me, chalkboard. Okay. The kinds of people who are in the world are divided originally by Marx and Engels as belonging to the bourgeoisie or the proletariat. The bourgeoisie are those who own the means of production. The proletariat are those who work for, say, a salary or a wage. So it doesn't quite correlate to rich or middle class and poor. It correlates to those people who have factories or who have companies or who control the amount of money other people are getting paid, for example, for doing some amount of labor, whereas the proletariat are the people who just do that labor. There are also, and especially this happens in the 19th, 18th, 19th century, you get the petty bourgeoisie, people who own shops, for example, or people who work by, well, it's not really a good example, but people who have a trade and can set their own prices. That would be an example of the petty bourgeoisie, which doesn't get quite as much attention in traditional Marxism. The bourgeoisie are doing great. They are feeling very comfortable with the way that material reality or labor and production are working, because they, and let's just think of them for a minute as like a CEO or the corporation that owns factories, are earning lots of money. And the proletariat, the people who just go to work, are feeling either like everything is stacked against them, which it is, according to Marxists, or like you are really happy because minimum wages, whatever it is in Illinois, and I should know this, but it's something like $8.50. And then if you get a raise and you're earning $10 an hour, maybe you feel a lot better about where you fall in the proletariat spectrum or category. Both of those responses, or indeed any response that the proletariat have that doesn't call for some sort of revolution, is what Marx would describe and others would describe as being alienated from your labor. So one way to think about this is, and I'm going to think about this for me, but you think about it for you too. In the olden days, when you could get like sandwiches at Jimmy John's, which maybe you still can because they deliver, like how much would you pay for a sandwich at Jimmy John's? And maybe depending on what you're really into, you would pay something that was $8.50. So that seems not unreasonable, and like maybe even really good. Or maybe even at the Gizmo, you would spend that much money if you were hungry and, you know, wanted food. But if $8.50 is the minimum wage, let's imagine that your job at Knox is to clean bathrooms, toilets in Seymour, which is good, honest work. And then you wonder, if you cleaned toilets and bathrooms in Seymour for an hour and you got $8.50, fine, that's your job. Would you clean bathrooms, toilets in Seymour for an hour if someone promised you a sandwich afterwards? Maybe not. Maybe you would say, I would clean a toilet, or I would do it for 20 minutes. Or you might say, I'm not going to do that at all. It's a particular sort of thing that I just can't bring myself to do, right? Which would be a position of privilege. Or you might say something like, that's not worth it. All of these are maybe saying the same thing. If you say that's not worth it, what you mean is my labor is worth more than a sandwich from Jimmy John's. And yet that might be your job, and you do it for 10 hours a week, and then you spend the money on a sandwich from Jimmy John's. What Marxists would point out is that the amount of money you get and what you're willing to trade it for or exchange it for divorces you from the labor that you put into earning the money. So if someone says, do you want, I don't know, a regular size Coke, or do you want like a large Coke and it's 55 cents more, you might think, sure, but you don't think of that in terms of the amount of labor that it cost you to earn that 55 cents. Okay. The other way this works is that if you buy things, you buy them based on what you can afford and how much you like them, but you don't think about the labor that went into them. So for example, you might go to Walmart or Target or wherever and buy a sweater for 20 bucks or whatever. And then you have to think about all of the labor that went into producing that sweater. So someone, I don't even know what sweaters are made of. Like I'm wearing fabric. I don't know how to make fabric. There's thread, obviously, that gets woven. I don't know what thread is. Cotton, polyester thread. How is that turned into thread? Is it actually woven on looms still until it's fabric? And then there's a pattern and someone in a sweatshop cuts the fabric to the pattern and then sews it, I guess. But why are there different kinds of fabrics? How do you put elastic in a shirt? I don't actually even understand. And then it's shipped somewhere and someone puts a sticker or a tag on it saying how much it's worth. And I might decide, well, I'm willing to pay $18 for a sweater, but not 25. How is it possible that all of the, plus the labor of growing the cotton or producing the elastic, which I don't even know how that works, how is it possible that all of that labor is worth only $18 or $25? That is an alienation from the labor that went into the production of this item that I might just buy without thinking twice about it. Or I might buy and wonder, like, is this item worth 2 or 3 hours of cleaning toilets in Seymour? Or what, I'm just sort of, that would be a job that I don't like, but there might be other jobs that you don't like, so I picked that one, but you could pick another one. Um, uh, uh, so I'm spacing out because I'm thinking of other examples of this, but like the one that's occurring to me now is my sister's a nurse, and normally that's really fulfilling work for her, and it is now also, but now she's terrified of, she works in a hospital and she's terrified of contracting COVID, right? So, but she's not like she gets more money just because she's more scared and or her labor is more valuable. So that's another kind of alienation from labor. And what Marxists are saying is that we in the proletariat have lost track of the fact that our labor is in any way related to the value of the things that we spend the money on, and that our labor is as intensive as the labor of a CEO of some major corporation who might work 20 or 60 hours a week and earn 1,000 times, 10,000 times more than we do, if you include salaries and bonuses and perks. Another way of thinking about this, if you watched the videos that I showed you, is wealth inequality and what we think inequality is versus what it really is. If you took, for example, I went to grad school in Berkeley and they had Berkeley bucks, which meant if you were a doctor or a waste disposal person, each hour that you worked, you got like 10 Berkeley bucks. And then you could spend them wherever Berkeley bucks were accepted at stores. Ithaca has the same thing, Ithaca dollars. And it is a way of saying that your labor as a doctor isn't more valuable than my labor as a waste disposal person. Okay, there might be problems with thinking about that depending on schooling and education and how much that cost, which is another way of thinking about inequality. Okay, I'm getting a little bit off my topic here. So we're alienated from our labor, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. On Wednesday, we're going to be reading Althusser. And Althusser is doing this thing to the structure. Marxism can be very structuralist. Althusser is sort of breaking down the structure and talking more about how ideologies create the base. instead of the base just creating the ideologies. So we can talk about that in class. I also want to point out that there is in England or other parts of literary theory something called cultural studies, which is essentially an attempt to democratize art or literature. So if someone is doing something that we might call cultural studies, that could be like an analysis of a reading of a critical literary reading of an advertisement, say, or Twitter, something that doesn't require us to be looking at high art in order to understand how something fits into ideologies. And that kind of cultural studies is analyzing culture without making the distinctions that we might make between high and low art, without making distinctions that the ideologies that we attend to would sort of support between things that deserve attention and things that don't deserve attention. In other words, all aspects of culture deserve attention from this Marxist or cultural studies point of view, because they're all participating in an ideology that we want to work to understand and perhaps deconstruct. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I could go on about this for a long time, and no doubt I will in class.